This is from Andrew in Texas via our text messaging service. Xi has already changed the Constitution to stay in power. Do you believe that Xi will remain in power his entire lifetime?
Well, you know, I don't know what his intentions are, but he did in 2018 revise the Constitution, and it was ratified by the People's Congress a few years later. So it allows him to serve his 5-year term and then run again and be elected. And so as long as he can lead China in a direction that pleases the party, the top-level party officials, he'll remain in power. He has tremendous ambitions. More than any Chinese leader since Mao. He has a strong vision for how China can be a leader in artificial intelligence. He's put together the biggest infrastructure program in history with connections around the world, building ports and bridges and train tracks all over the world. So he's a tremendously ambitious leader.
Martin Smith joining us from New York. Mary Elizabeth is in New York City as well. Line for Democrats, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I'm listening to the conversation, and it's always been my opinion that when trade relations began with the Chinese government, there was a question earlier about Kissinger and Nixon and their, quote, opening up China. And the fact that whole American industries moved their businesses and their manufacturing facilities to China to save money and to have greed and more profit. And it's always been my understanding that all these contracts that were signed were controlled by the People's Liberation Army. So I wonder what is the relationship with the minister and with the People's Liberation Army, because 51% of the contract was controlled by the PLA, and then the 49% was any Western investment in that particular contract, which meant that they would be in control of the contract and the relationships, the trade relationships in that country. And what with the tariffs that the quote incoming administration is proffering, is what effect is that going to have on American consumers who are buying all of their intangible products to have the label made in China?
Well, one of the effects of those tariffs is going to be, at least in the short term, the effect in the long term is a little bit squishy to figure out, but in the short term, and I'm talking several years, it's going to cause a rise in prices, and it's going to cause, therefore, inflation. You're quite astute in terms of the investment and the control by the government of China so that foreign investment comes into the country and then makes agreements with China because they want the cheap labor, they want cheap property, they want benefits. But China says, look, you gotta tell us what your trade secrets are, what's your secret sauce. And then the government takes that information and gets a Chinese company to manufacture the product using the special sauce, whatever that is, whatever product we're talking about, and then drives the U.S. company out of business. It's been a very rocky road for many businesses. They did rush in under Deng Xiaoping in the 70s and into the 80s. And foreign investment was healthy, but it was struggling. And many corporate leaders came to the White House to complain about how China was stealing their intellectual property, driving them out of business. Now, tariffs is a kind of different page in all of this. But you're quite right that there is a problem with the way in which U.S. companies are able to operate in China. At this point, many of them are fleeing the country. Elon Musk is an exception. He has a huge Tesla factory in Shanghai. and he's a kind of bridge between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. It'll be interesting to see if he can be effective in bridging that gap.
The question on tariffs coming a day after we found out from the incoming president about plans to slap an additional 10% tariffs on all Chinese products. I want to give viewers a flavor from your documentary on the trade war and tariffs in particular. This is about 2 minutes and 20 seconds from the documentary, China, the U.S., and the Rise of Xi Jinping.
Trade war worries igniting after the president signed this order to slap tough tariffs on China. Punishment.
He started with a 10% tariff on Chinese aluminum, 30% on solar panels and electric vehicles, 25% on steel, and nearly everything else made in China.
Surprisingly, China's not happy, already threatening retaliation.
美方的行为是典型的贸易霸凌主义。中方必将会做出必要的反制，坚决地维护自身的正当合法权益。
What China did was move its exports to other countries and move its imports from other countries as well. So it shifted the purchase of soybeans, for example, from the U.S. to Brazil. So that wasn't a useful policy.
President Trump has just slapped tariffs on another $200 billion of Chinese exports, igniting the biggest trade war in economic history.
Trump's trade war would consume the remainder of his presidency.
China is now punching back with an equal amount of tariffs on American exports.
After several tit-for-tat tariff increases, the trade war, which continued into the Biden administration, actually increased the trade deficit.
The trade deficit has skyrocketed to $891 billion, the highest ever.
Cost increases also led to a decline in U.S. manufacturing jobs.
Destroyed the industry in the United States.
Intellectual property theft continued, and the costs imposed by tariffs were simply passed along to consumers of imported products. And now, Trump has promised to impose even higher tariffs once he is back in office. Tariffs were put in place because China's economic policy was hurting U.S. factories and workers.
That's a belief on the part of some people in the U.S., especially by the people of the Trump administration.
The Biden administration has even extended those.
But if you talk in private, many don't agree with such kind of policy. Why? Because it hurts the U.S. economy.
There is the argument
you have the high inflation. Where do you get it? In part because of these tariffs.
The documentary is set to air tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on PBS. Martin Smith, what's your expectation of the reaction in China to this latest 10% tariff threat?
The line that they're using, I've heard the spokespeople, and I've heard from Xi Jinping himself in various venues that he's spoken in, is that he thinks this is not going to work, and everybody's going to be hurt by this. So I don't know exactly what will be accomplished. Right now, President Trump is not in office, so this amounts to some saber rattling. And he fashions himself a deal maker, and I think he's trying to set the stage and get Xi Jinping's attention, and to then try to negotiate something that will not be harmful. Look, we're bound together. They need our market. We need their investment. So it's very hard to decouple, and that's been the phrase of late, that we're decoupling from China. But it hasn't really benefited anybody at this point in time, and I don't know if this saber rattling that we're seeing is going to play out in once Trump is in office. That remains to be seen. It's very hard to predict what Donald Trump is going to do tomorrow.
Less than 15 minutes left with Martin Smith this morning. Diane's waiting in DeSoto, Kansas. Republican, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. In thinking about Xi Jinping and the way he grew up, it almost sounds like he had an attitude, if you can't beat him, join him. But anyways, my question is with regard to his relationship with Trump, and especially China's aggressive attitude towards Taiwan and the Philippines, etc. I think that they're both survivors. Xi Jinping is a survivor, and he made his path as a result of that. Donald Trump is also a survivor, coming back the second time. And I just wonder, how do you think this influences both of their reactions to the other with regard to especially aggressive policies with Taiwan, et cetera? Thank you.
Diane, thanks for the question.
It's a very good question. I think Donald Trump admires strong leaders. I think he's, in fact, envious of the way in which a leader like Xi Jinping can control what happens in his nation, in his country. So I think there's some admiration that goes on there. With Xi Jinping, it's hard to say how it's relatively opaque and hard to determine how he sees Donald Trump. I think he's cautiously sort of circling right now and trying to figure it out and figure out what's next. I think Xi Jinping has focused very much on his domestic enemies, on repression, and then on his, as you mentioned, threats against Taiwan, against the Philippines, the moves in the South China Sea to build military outposts off of coral reefs in the middle of the ocean. I think he's been focused there. But now he needs to focus on the economy, and I think that's something he has, in the words of one of our interviewees, taken for granted. That the economy was in very good shape when he took over, not such good shape now, and that he needs to focus on that. And I think the coming of Donald Trump will force him to focus on that even more. You know, during the COVID lockdown, there were demonstrations across China against the restrictions on movement of people, and they were the largest demonstrations since the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. The PLA and the state security didn't shoot people on the streets, but what you saw was a lot of people arrested and given prison terms, and I think it portended trouble ahead, because there is this sort of undercurrent of resentment, of protest, of unhappiness, especially among 20 and 30-year-old people in China. And so he's got to manage that with his toolbox of repression, and at the same time get the economy moving again. So he's got a big challenge there.
Is the PLA any match for the U.S. military?
We don't know. The Chinese, I think, I talked to a number of military officials when I was in China. And, you know, they say, well, you know, our army is not experienced. We haven't fought wars. The United States has fought several wars. We haven't really won them. But there is experience in the U.S., in the Pentagon, that they lack. And I think that there's a certain amount of insecurity. I think, you know, Xi Jinping would see Taiwan as an opportunity for his military to learn and get some experience. I don't know if that's enough to push him to pull the lever, but is the PLA, are we a match for one another? They have a bigger navy. They have more ships. They're turning them out very quickly. But it's really hard to say. It's a massive army. And I had a conversation, it's in the film, with the Admiral Paparo, Sam Paparo, who is the head of the Indo-Pacific Command, all the soldiers in the Indo-Pacific. It's a huge responsibility. He says, look, if there's a war over Taiwan, it will dwarf the Second World War. It will lead to a depression. It will be catastrophic if that happens.
To Winter Park, Florida, Independent, this is Ian. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, good morning, guys. Just wanted to thank C-SPAN for taking my call. Before my question, I just also wanted to say I had not heard of this film before today's segment, and throughout just hearing you speak about it and the couple of clips that have been played, I'm really looking forward to watching it. Unfortunately, it seems to air at 1 in the morning for me, so I won't be watching it today.
But let me say that it will be available online. In perpetuity.
I already found the website and everything, so I'm looking forward to that.
So it's free there, and you can watch it on your own time.
Yeah, so the question I had was, throughout the making of this entire film, were there any moments in particular that were memorable for you? And if so, which one was the most memorable? Thank you.
There is a theme that came up throughout the documentary, from the Cultural Revolution to Tiananmen Square to the battle for Hong Kong, where the crackdown in Xinjiang against Muslims, the minority there that's been resisting Chinese rule. And that is when they take a dissident and put them in jail, they often then pressure family members to testify against their offspring, their siblings, whatever. And this theme is repeated. And they seem to be saying that, look, your loyalty has to be to the party, not to your family. And I found it extremely moving to listen to some of these people who have fled the country and talk about how they were turned, their families were turned against them. And this is a tactic that repeats itself over and over again throughout the documentary. It's extremely moving and heart-wrenching to watch. You'll see it in the documentary, especially one woman that fought against during the uprising in Hong Kong. She's in the U.S., there's a bounty on her head, and she says, look, at the end of the day, this is about fighting for the people you love, but they cut you off. She's not able to talk to her mother or father who are still in Hong Kong. She resists crying in the documentary. She was very moving.
Lily, Gaithersburg, Maryland, Republican, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I'm excited to hear this topic. I'm a first-generation immigrant from China, so I think I wanted to add some of my perspective. I think I got really interested when I heard about the part when your guest was trying to shoot this documentary in China, and he was basically kind of like a stonewalled. And that's so typical of how they do things. And I want to say that, I left the country more than 20 years ago. Back then, it was quite open and, much, much more open than, nowadays. I was shocked myself looking back and realizing that, how the country has gone backwards. And I believe she wants to be Mao number 2, which, I really detest Mao because I think the worst part about him is that he treated the people of China like trash. And so she does not care about the people. And he was basically riding the coattails of the economic boom, from Deng Xiaoping and others. But he's ruining the country. And I feel so sad about the people of China and they're suffering under the Communist Party, even though obviously economic condition was better before, but now it's kind of like coming down too. And I also wanted to say that I always laugh when I hear about people here calling Trump a dictator. They have not seen a dictator yet. And I also laugh when people talk about, rant about Fox. If it's not for Fox and some of the right wing, they don't get everything right. But if it were not for them, this country would be just like communist propaganda because it's all the same thing. So that's my just 2 cents. Thank you.
Martin Smith.
I appreciate your thoughts, and I think you're quite they're quite cogent. in terms of Xi Jinping and the turn to a sort of Maoist autocracy. And it's I've talked to many Chinese. I welcome you to America. I'm glad you're able to speak freely and make a phone call and speak on the air about these things. You couldn't do that in China. Chinese censorship it prevents any, free speech, freedom of assembly. All these things are threatened, and human rights ultimately. So I appreciate your call.